It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I realized that Violet Ridge had become more of a prison than a home. The ancient oak trees that once lined the driveway had shed their leaves, leaving behind nothing but skeletal branches that seemed to reach for the sky like the ghosts of memories long past. The estate loomed over me, its grand facade now chipped and weathered from years of neglect. I could still feel the echoes of laughter, the clink of fine china, the clatter of heels against marble floors. But all of that felt like a distant dream, slipping through my fingers, vanishing with the wind that rustled the dead leaves beneath my feet. I am Elena Harper, widow mother, and matriarch of a family that has forgotten its roots. The grandiose home my late husband Luke and I built together was supposed to be a testament to our success, a symbol of what we had accomplished. Instead, it had become a weight around my neck, its walls closing in on me. Every inch of this place carried the memories of a life we had once shared, a life now reduced to a collection of faded photographs and an old garden that had long since lost its beauty. I could feel the years slipping away from me with every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind that passed through the broken windows. The house, once alive with the sound of children and laughter, was now eerily silent, and that silence was suffocating. Sophia, my only child, had grown up within these walls. She was once the center of my world, the reason I fought so hard to make sure this place endured. The reason I put up with the late nights, the endless meetings, the sacrifices that drained me of everything but my will to succeed. I gave her everything, every bit of my heart, my soul, and my legacy. But somewhere along the way, she had slipped through my fingers. The child I raised to appreciate the weight of our family name, the legacy of hard work and sacrifice, had become a stranger to me. And as I looked out over the estate, I realized that I didn't recognize her anymore. It had been years since I'd truly spoken to Sophia, not since her marriage to Ian Grant, a man I had always distrusted. I knew he saw me as an obstacle, a relic of the past. He was a man who believed that the world owed him something, that privilege was a birthright, not something earned through sweat and blood. Ian had always been charming, but there was something about him that made my skin crawl. I could see the hunger in his eyes, the way he coveted my wealth, my status things that had never mattered to me, until I realized how much they meant to him. I had tried to warn Sophia, tried to show her the kind of man he was, but she didn't listen. She never did. Now they were both here in my home with their polished smiles and empty words. Sophia had come to me with a proposal, no a demand, just a few days ago. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with that sweet falseness I had grown so accustomed to, "you've been talking about selling Violet Ridge for years. It's time. We can't keep this place forever, and honestly, I think it's time to let go. Let's move on." I should have known. I should have recognized the familiar scent of greed in the air, the way her eyes darted to the horizon, as if she could already see the money rolling in. I didn't say anything at first, just looked at her, at Ian standing behind her, that smug look on his face, as if they had already made up their minds. They were here to take what they thought they deserved. But this was my home, my legacy. Luke had built this estate with his own hands, pouring everything into it. He had worked day and night, sacrificing everything for this vision for our future. And now it felt like they were ready to tear it all apart, to strip it of its soul, to sell it off to the highest bidder. I wasn't going to let that happen. I had spent the last few months watching them, quietly observing the way they maneuvered, the way they spoke about money, as if it were a simple tool to be used and discarded when it no longer served their purpose. I could see the cracks in their facade, the way Ian would glance at the paintings on the walls, the way Sophia would casually mention her need for more space in the living room. It was all a plan, I realized. They weren't just after Violet Ridge. They were after everything Luke and I had worked for. They were after my future, my wealth, my legacy. I couldn't let them have it, not without a fight. I went up to my study, the room I had spent countless hours in with Luke, sorting through paperwork, discussing our future, and making plans for the family. It had been months since I'd opened the desk drawer, but as I did, I found something that made my heart stop: Luke's journals. I had forgotten about them, tucked away in the farthest corner, hidden from prying eyes. These journals weren't just pages of thoughts. They were a record of his fears, his hopes, and most importantly, his instructions to me. He had known what would happen one day, that this family, my daughter included, might not be as loyal to the legacy as I had hoped. He had written it all down, every piece of advice, every instruction for how to protect what we had built. The estate, the wealth, the legacy. It wasn't just for us. It was for future generations. And if I was to protect it, I had to follow through with what he had planned. But as I flipped through the pages, something else caught my eye. The entries became darker. Luke had written about Sophia's changing nature, about his fears that she would squander everything he had built. He knew deep down that his daughter's desire for wealth would one day tear this family apart. The weight of the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just fighting for an estate. I was fighting for the future of our family, for something that had been handed down from generation to generation. And I realized that if I didn't stand up now, if I didn't act, Violet Ridge would be nothing more than a memory. Sophia and Ian wanted to sell it. They thought I was weak, that I had no power left. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just Elena Harper, widow and mother. I was the last line of defense for everything Luke and I had built, and I would fight to protect it. The tension between Sophia and me had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface, but the moment she suggested selling Violet Ridge, it exploded. It wasn't just the estate she was after. It was the very foundation of my life. The legacy I had spent years building was suddenly up for grabs. I could see it in her eyes, the same greed that had driven her away from the values I once tried to instill in her. The woman standing before me wasn't my daughter, at least not the one I had raised. No, this woman was someone else, someone who saw opportunity, not family. I had loved her more than I knew how to express, and now I found myself standing across from her as if she were a stranger. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. Sophia's words, so carefully rehearsed, dripped with the kind of calculated sweetness I had learned to despise. "Mom, you've been saying it yourself for years. Violet Ridge is too much for you now. It's time to let go. We could use the money for other investments, something that would set us up for the future. Think about it." She smiled, but I saw the subtle shift in her expression, a glint of something more insidious. She was testing the waters, trying to gauge how far she could push me before I buckled. Ian stood beside her arms, crossed an expression of feigned indifference plastered on his face. I had never liked the man, his smug attitude, his constant need for validation. He had always treated me like I was a relic of a bygone era, something to be tolerated but never respected. He was a man who saw value only in what could be used, and right now, Violet Ridge was the prize he and Sophia both craved. But I wasn't ready to hand it over, not yet, not without a fight. "You think I've been saying that to myself, Sophia?" I said, my voice steady but firm. I didn't let the anger rise, not yet. I wasn't about to show them how deeply their words had cut. "You think I've been considering it, when all I've wanted was for this family to carry on what your father and I built." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air like an accusation. "This house isn't just bricks and mortar. It's our history. It's what your father left behind. It's everything I've worked for, every sacrifice I've made." Sophia's eyes flickered with something like impatience, as if I were an obstacle that needed to be moved aside. "Mom, I get it," she said, her voice now laced with a patronizing tone. "But you're not getting any younger. You can't keep up with everything here. Let me and Ian help you. Let me and Ian help you." The words echoed in my mind, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. Sophia had been planting the seeds for this moment for years. She had been setting me up for the inevitable. She knew I wouldn't want to part with the estate, so she had been wearing me down slowly, piece by piece, convincing me I couldn't handle it anymore. She had been planning this for a long time, but what she didn't know, what neither she nor Ian realized, was that I wasn't the naive woman she remembered. "I don't need help from you, Sophia," I said, standing straighter, letting the weight of my words sink in. "What I need is respect. Respect for what your father and I created. You're asking me to sell out everything that matters to me just to make room for more of your investments." I didn't raise my voice, but I let the silence stretch out, feeling the power of my words. "You think that's what your father would have wanted? You think that's what I've spent all these years building, just to hand it over to you?" Sophia's smile faltered. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't expected: fear. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She wasn't as sure of herself as she wanted me to believe, but just as quickly as it appeared, the mask slid back into place. "It's not about disrespecting you, Mom. It's about the future," she said, her voice slipping into that sweet tone she knew worked on me. "I just want to secure our future. And Ian and we've been talking. We think it's time for a new chapter." A new chapter. That was the phrase she used when she wanted to cut ties with the past. The same phrase she had used when she decided to abandon her art for a life of luxury and excess. I could see the way her eyes darted to the windows, as if she were imagining the millions of dollars already in her hands. The truth was simple. She didn't care about the legacy. She cared about what it could give her. And Ian. He was just along for the ride, his plans already being put into motion behind the scenes. But I wasn't about to let them take everything I had worked for without a fight. I had spent years building this empire with my late husband, and I wasn't going to let their selfishness tear it all down. I knew I had to play my cards carefully. I had to outsmart them just like I had outsmarted so many before. I began keeping a closer eye on the business side of things. I reviewed the financials, the estate's property records, and most importantly, the trust Luke had set up before his death. I found discrepancies, strange accounts, and transfers that had been made without my knowledge. And then one morning, I discovered something even more troubling. A document signed by both Sophia and Ian proposed selling Violet Ridge without my consent, bypassing me entirely in a way that seemed too neat to planned. This wasn't just about selling property. This was about erasing me from the equation. The weight of betrayal crashed over me. Sophia had crossed the line. She wasn't just trying to take control of the estate. She was trying to take control of my life, my legacy. She thought she could outmaneuver me, manipulate me into a corner where I would have no choice but to give in. But I had always been underestimated. I knew I had to act, but carefully. I wasn't going to let Sophia or Ian know I had uncovered their plan. They thought I was old, that I didn't have the stamina or the wit to keep up with their scheming. But what they didn't realize was that I had been around the block. I had seen every kind of manipulation, every kind of lie, and I had learned how to fight back. I reached out to my old lawyer, Frank Miller, the man who had helped Luke and me navigate through some of the toughest times in our lives. Frank was the only one who knew the full extent of our assets. He knew what Luke had left behind and how important it was that I kept everything in the family. When I met with him, I didn't waste any time. I showed him the document and the evidence I had gathered. "Frank, it's time," I said, my voice low but firm. "I need you to get ready. I want to put everything into motion. They're not going to get away with this. They've underestimated me for the last time." Frank looked at me, his eyes narrowing with understanding. "You're sure, Elena?" he asked quietly, knowing full well what kind of war we were about to start. "I'm sure," I replied. "They've crossed a line. Now it's my turn." As I left Frank's office, I could feel the weight of the coming storm. I knew I was about to enter a battle for everything I had ever cared about. But I wasn't afraid. I had waited too long for this moment. I wasn't going to let them take what belonged to me. Sophia and Ian were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. The day I had been preparing for finally arrived. It felt like the world had slowed down in those final hours leading up to the confrontation. I had spent days, weeks, really carefully constructing my plan, gathering evidence, and quietly collecting my strength. I couldn't afford to slip up. There was too much at stake. The estate, my legacy, and yes, my very dignity were on the line. Every decision I made now would define not just my future, but the future of my family. Sophia and Ian thought they had me cornered. They thought they could push me around, manipulate me, and use my own age against me. But they had underestimated the power of a woman, backed into a corner, a woman who had built everything she had from the ground up. They thought they could break me with their clever words, their insinuations, their disregard for my hard work. But they didn't know the fire that still burned deep within me. I had arranged for the confrontation to take place at Violet Ridge, of course. There was no other place that could carry the weight of what I was about to reveal. I needed them to understand what they were truly up against, what they had been trying to tear down. The place itself, this home, this land, was a symbol of all the sacrifices Luke and I had made. I wasn't about to let them sell it for a quick profit. This was more than a house. It was everything. The bones of Violet Ridge would outlast them, just as my determination would. I knew Sophia would try to use her charm, her manipulative smile to calm me down. She thought she could handle me the same way she handled Ian, by controlling the conversation, distracting him with sweet words and empty promises. But today, I wasn't going to let her have control. Today, I would take back what was mine. The doorbell rang, and I knew that they were here. I stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the front door. I felt a surge of power, a calm resolve sweeping over me. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about clarity. I wasn't going to let them play me anymore. Sophia and Ian entered dressed in their usual finery, she in a tailored dress that screamed high society, he in a sleek, expensive suit, as if they were about to make a deal with the devil himself. They walked in like they owned the place, like this house. My house was just another piece of property to be traded. I could already see the calculating glint in their eyes the way they looked at Violet Ridge, not as a home, but as an opportunity. Sophia Ian. I said, my voice low but firm. I took a breath and slowly descended the stairs, taking my time. I wanted them to feel the weight of this moment. I've been thinking about your proposal, and I've decided that I won't be selling Violet Ridge. Sophia glanced at Ian, her brow furrowing in confusion, as if she hadn't expected me to respond so quickly, so resolutely. Mom, she began, her voice sweet but tinged with impatience. We've been over this. This house is too much for you now. You can't keep up with everything. It's not good for you to be alone in such a big place. Ian and I can help you, but you have to let go. It's for the best. She reached out for my hand, but I pulled it back, not allowing her false affection to land. No, Sophia. It's not for the best. It's for your convenience. You and Ian are trying to sell this house for your own gain. You think you can fool me into thinking it's a good idea, but I see right through it. I watched as their faces hardened. This wasn't the soft, submissive Elena they had expected. This was the woman who had built an empire, who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of what she had. Ian took a step forward, his eyes narrowed in challenge. Look, Elena, we've been patient with you, he said, his voice thick with disdain. You're old, and this house is nothing but a burden. Your health isn't what it used to be, and you're wasting money keeping this place in condition. It's time to face facts. We're doing you a favor. You're doing me a favor. I repeated, my voice cold. Let me tell you something, Ian. You've been doing more than that. You've been stealing from me. For months. For years, even. But you've miscalculated. I've known about your little schemes. I've seen the transfers, the secret dealings you thought I wouldn't notice. Sophia's eyes flickered with something that resembled panic. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone turning defensive, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't as calm as she wanted me to believe. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were documents detailing every shady transaction I had uncovered. Every transfer Ian had made, every account he had secretly opened to siphon funds. The proof was irrefutable. I spread the papers across the table in front of them, watching their faces turn ashen as they saw the evidence laid out before them. "This," I said, tapping the documents, "is where the money has gone. This is how you've been running your little scam behind my back. For years, you've been using your marriage to Sophia as a cover to manipulate me to steal from me. You thought you could take everything I've worked for and just walk away." Ian stood frozen for a moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to Sophia, who had grown increasingly pale. He hadn't expected me to find out. He hadn't expected me to be this far ahead of him. I saw the panic rising in his chest as he tried to figure out his next move. But there was no escape. The trap had already been set, and I wasn't done yet. "You've been lying to me, manipulating me, and using my trust as a weapon, and now you're going to pay the price," I continued, my voice growing colder with each word. "You've been systematically selling off my belongings, my heirlooms, all while pretending to care about me. But I know the truth now, Ian. You're nothing but a thief." Sophia recoiled as if she had been struck. Her usual composure cracked, and for the first time in years, I saw the real fear in her eyes. She was no longer the daughter I had raised, the woman I had once believed in. She was a stranger, a liar, a manipulator, and she was about to lose everything. "You think you can just take what's mine? What your father and I built?" I said, my voice rising now, the years of anger and frustration finally boiling over. "Well, I'm done. I'm done letting you manipulate me. I'm done being your pawn." Sophia's voice trembled. "Mom, please, you don't understand. This isn't about the money. This is about our future. We need this to secure." "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her words like a knife. "It's not about our future, Sophia. It's about your future and Ian's. It's about greed. And I won't let you ruin everything that Luke and I spent our lives building." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the truth settling over us like a heavy fog. Sophia and Ian stood there speechless, the full impact of their betrayal sinking in. I could feel the tension crackling in the air as they realized they were no longer in control of the situation. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice full of finality. "I've filed the paperwork. The estate is no longer under your control. I've already moved everything into a trust that can't be touched. Violet Ridge will be protected, and I'll make sure you never get your hands on it." Sophia looked at me, a mixture of disbelief and anger flooding her face. "You're making a mistake," she spat, her voice venomous. "You're throwing away everything for nothing. You'll regret this, Mom." But I didn't care. Not anymore. It was over. The years of being manipulated, the years of living in the shadow of my daughter's ambition, everything came crashing down in that one moment. I had won. "I'll regret nothing," I said, my voice steady, "because I know exactly what's worth fighting for, and I'm done letting you steal it from me." As I turned to leave the room, I could feel the weight of victory settling over me. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the house. It was about reclaiming my power. It was about showing them that the woman they had tried to push aside was still standing strong. And for the first time in years, I knew I had finally taken back control. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, quiet reflection, and slow but steady changes. It was as though the very air around Violet Ridge had shifted, taking on a different weight, a different purpose. I had taken my stand. Now it was time to let the pieces fall where they may. The silence in the house was almost deafening at times, as though it too was waiting for the fallout to settle. It was strange, almost surreal to look around and realize that everything I had worked for was no longer in jeopardy. I had fought back, but the fight wasn't over yet. The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and I knew Sophia and Ian would try to put it out to sweep it under the rug, but there was no escaping it now. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them hide from the consequences. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this with anything other than the full weight of their actions. I had already taken the first step. I had filed the necessary documents, filed the official reports. The estate, once so vulnerable, was now protected by the strongest legal walls I could build. But more than that, I had made a vow to myself. I was going to make them understand exactly what they had done. The first move was to ensure the family business was secured no more room for manipulation. I'd gathered all the evidence, the documents, the financial records. I contacted Frank immediately after the confrontation and instructed him to start the legal process. We were going to go after Ian's ill-gotten funds, his secret accounts, and the lies he had spread about my mental state in order to get his hands on the estate. The trust I had set up was foolproof, but I needed to make sure that nothing was left for them to seize. The last thing I wanted was for them to turn around and claim a victory by exploiting a legal loophole I had missed. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Sophia didn't give up easily. Her pride and her desperation clung to her like a second skin, and I could see that in the days that followed, she tried to salvage whatever she could. She called several times, but I never picked up. The few times I allowed myself to entertain the thought of answering, I simply reminded myself of the anger I had felt, the betrayal, the hurt, the disbelief, and it quelled any urge to be kind, to be forgiving. This wasn't the time for softness. This wasn't the time for sympathy. One day, about a week after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Ian. I had expected him to give up, to slink back into whatever corner he had come from, but instead, he was still trying to salvage his situation, trying to manipulate me into backing down. The call was cold and transactional, just like him. His voice was calm but edged with frustration. "Elena," he said, his voice dripping with that familiar insincerity. "You're making a mistake, you know that, right? This doesn't have to go to court. We could settle this, just you and me. You don't need to make it ugly. Ugly." That word hit me like a slap in the face. He had spent years making everything ugly, the deceit, the lies, the manipulation. And now he wanted me to believe that it was all just a simple misunderstanding. He wanted me to back down, to believe that the years of his scheming could just disappear with a few words. But I wasn't that naive anymore. "Make it ugly," I repeated, almost amused. "You've already made it ugly, Ian. You and your wife trying to steal from me, trying to erase everything I've worked for. No, this isn't about making anything ugly. This is about making it right." He tried to negotiate as he always did, offering money, promising to leave Violet Ridge alone, telling me how much he respected the estate's history. But I knew better now. I wasn't interested in his empty promises. Respect was a word he'd never understood. If he really respected me, he wouldn't have spent all those years undermining me, using me as a stepping stone for his own benefit. The call ended abruptly after I made it clear that I would not be bullied, that there would be no deal, no compromise. I would fight this to the very end. I was firm with Frank, too. We started preparing the necessary documents to press charges for grand larceny. Ian had stolen far more than money. He had stolen my trust, my peace of mind, and my family's integrity. If he thought he could just walk away without facing the consequences, he had another thing coming. Meanwhile, Sophia remained eerily quiet. She hadn't tried to call me again. I wondered not for the first time what she was really thinking. Was she angry, regretful? Did she realize the full extent of her actions, or was she still blinded by her own ambition? Was she waiting for a second chance to strike, Or had she too begun to understand that the life she had been living was now over? Days passed, then weeks. The court process was slow, as these things often are, but the more time passed, the clearer it became that Sophia and Ian had no real way of clawing back what they had lost. They couldn't undo the damage they had caused. And it wasn't just the estate they had lost, it was their place in the family. Ian had been the catalyst for all of this, but Sophia had been just as complicit. I had tried to teach her that family was everything, that loyalty was the most precious thing a person could have. And now, with everything laid bare, she had lost both the estate and her family. There was a small, fleeting moment when I thought I might hear from her again. I imagined her calling, her voice soft, full of regret, apologizing for everything. But it never came. In fact, I never heard from her again, not once. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail addressed from Sophia. I had expected some kind of apology, some attempt to make amends, but when I opened it, I found something far more unsettling. It was a request for a meeting, one last attempt to settle things outside of court. The letter was carefully written, but the tone was unmistakable. She wasn't apologizing. She was still trying to get something from me. She was still looking for a way to reclaim the power she had lost. It was at that moment that I realized something crucial. Sophia hadn't learned a damn thing. She hadn't understood the lesson I had been trying to teach her all these years. The only thing she had learned was that people like her, people who manipulate and betray, don't change unless they're forced to. I decided not to meet her. There was no point. There would be no reconciliation. The family I had once hoped to restore, the legacy I had wanted to preserve, was gone. The things I had worked for could never be replaced, and it was clear now that Sophia wasn't interested in learning from her mistakes. The most painful part of all of this wasn't the loss of Violet Ridge. It wasn't the betrayal by my daughter and son-in-law. No, the hardest part was realizing that I would never have the family I had dreamed of. The bonds that should have been unbreakable had been severed by greed, ambition, and selfishness. But there was also something liberating in that realization. I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone to validate me. I had spent years being told I was invisible, being manipulated, being ignored. And now, for the first time in my life, I was free. I was free to rebuild my life, to protect what mattered most, and to define my own future. The court battles dragged on for months, but I never wavered. Eventually, I emerged victorious. The estate was legally protected, and Ian was forced to pay back the stolen funds. I had won, but the victory felt hollow. The real victory was in the strength I had found within myself. For the first time in years, I stood alone, but I was stronger than I had ever been. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that family at its core is a choice. I could rebuild. I could start anew, and this time I would do it for myself. In the aftermath of everything, of the legal battles, the courtroom victories, and the silent moments of introspection that followed, I stood at the precipice of a new chapter in my life. It had been a slow, often painful process, shedding the layers of hurt, betrayal, and disappointment that had wrapped themselves around me like a suffocating veil. But as I stood in the garden looking at the vibrant green leaves of the oak tree my husband and I had planted all those years ago, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Violet Ridge, once the epicenter of turmoil, now felt different. The place had always been full of life, of laughter, of dreams, of plans for the future. But over the years, it had become a battlefield, a place where love and betrayal collided in the most devastating way. Now the air around the estate was still. The winds that once whispered secrets through the halls seemed to have quieted, as though even the house was at rest. I had done what I set out to do. I had protected this legacy, my husband's legacy, and I had done it with strength and resolve. But beyond that, I had reclaimed myself. The first week after the final court decision was made was quiet, almost unbearably so. It was just me now, and in the silence, I found an odd comfort. No longer did I have to brace myself for another argument with Sophia or wonder how I would navigate the next manipulation by Ian. The last threads of their influence had been severed, leaving only the raw reality of what remained: the house, the land, my future. But there was still work to be done. Not just for Violet Ridge, but for me. The foundation of everything I had worked, for everything my late husband and I had poured our hearts into, was solid. But it needed something more now. It needed to be shared. And I knew without a doubt that I couldn't let all this work go to waste. Not like this. That was when I decided to take the next step to turn my experience into something that could help others. For years, I had been a quiet witness to the way wealth and power could corrupt, could tear families apart. I had been a silent participant in my own suffering as Sophia and Ian had slowly stripped away my peace of mind. I had allowed it because I didn't believe I had the strength to fight back. But I had been wrong. I had been so wrong. I reached out to Frank Miller once more. This time, it wasn't about legal defense or court battles. This time, I had an idea, a vision for what I could do with my life now that I was free from the chains of deceit that had bound me for so long. I'm going to start a foundation, I told him one morning over coffee, for families like mine, for the ones who've been taken advantage of, for the people who don't know how to fight back against their own kin. People like me. Frank looked at me, his face serious, but there was something in his eyes, something like admiration. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore, are you, Elena? No, I said softly, my voice steady with purpose. I'm fighting for anyone who's been in my shoes. I won't let them feel invisible the way I did. I won't let them lose everything without even realizing it. We spent weeks organizing the details. I wanted it to be a safe space, an advocacy platform for families who were struggling with financial exploitation, particularly within their own families. I wanted it to be more than just a charity. I wanted it to be a movement, a place where people could find the courage to stand up for themselves, to reclaim their voice, just as I had done. The Harper Legacy Foundation was born out of that idea. It wasn't just about giving money, it was about giving people a chance to rebuild, to stand tall again. I reached out to experts and elder care lawyers and financial advisors. I wanted to make sure this foundation could offer real, tangible help to those who were vulnerable. Over time, the foundation grew. It became more than I had ever imagined, helping families recover, not only their finances, but also their sense of self-worth. It became a place where victims of financial abuse could speak out and be heard, where they could find the strength to regain control of their lives. In the early months, the work was exhausting. I didn't want to simply give people financial aid. I wanted to give them power. Every conversation, every meeting, every phone call became a chance to reshape someone's world. I spoke with elderly people who had been manipulated by their own children, spouses who had been exploited by in-laws for money, people who had been driven to the brink of despair by those they trusted most. The stories were heartbreaking, but they were also empowering. Every time I heard someone share their experience, I was reminded of why I had started this journey in the first place. No one should have to suffer in silence. No one should have to feel powerless. As the months passed, I realized that I was no longer the same woman who had once been blindsided by her daughter's greed and her son-in-law's betrayal. I was a different Elena now. I was a woman who had fought for everything she had and had emerged victorious, not because I had the money or the house or the land, but because I had found my voice. I had found the strength to say no, to stand up for myself, and to fight for what was right. I wasn't just protecting my legacy anymore. I was building a new one that would outlast Violet Ridge, one that would help others. The foundation was just the beginning. The more I spoke to people, the more I realized that this movement needed a platform. I needed to be able to reach more people to give them the tools they needed to protect themselves. And so after months of deliberation, I made the decision to start a television program. It would focus on raising awareness about financial abuse, particularly in families, and give people the knowledge they needed to protect themselves. I called it Legacy Reclaimed. The show was an immediate success. People began to reach out from all over the country, sharing their stories and seeking help. The program offered practical advice, emotional support, and real-world examples of families who had fought back against manipulation and deceit. It was everything I had hoped it would be and more. But it wasn't just about the show. It was about creating a space where people didn't have to feel like they were alone. I brought on experts in law finance and elder care to give people the tools they needed to recognize when they were being exploited. And slowly it became a movement that inspired people to speak out, to stand up, and to protect what was rightfully theirs. Then one day I received a letter. It was from a woman named Diana Peterson who had seen one of the episodes of Legacy Reclaimed where I spoke about my own experience with Sophia and Ian. She wrote to tell me that her son-in-law had been stealing from her, slowly draining her savings over the years, convincing her that her memory was failing and that she needed to move to a retirement home. She said she had been inspired by my story, and after watching the show, she had found the courage to speak up. She had confronted her son-in-law and with the help of a lawyer had regained control of her finances. She said that my story had given her the strength to take back her life. When I read that letter, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the satisfaction of having helped someone, it was the knowledge that what I had gone through wasn't just for me. It was for people like Diana and for the countless others who had been silenced, overlooked, and taken advantage of. I had found my true purpose. This wasn't just about rebuilding my own life, it was about helping others rebuild theirs. The Harper Legacy Foundation had grown beyond what I had ever imagined. It had become a beacon of hope for people who had lost everything just as I once had. But in the end, it wasn't just about the money or the property. It was about the strength to fight for what was right, to reclaim what was lost, and to rise from the ashes stronger than ever. As I sat in my study one evening looking out over the estate, I realized that Violet Ridge would always be a part of me. But it was no longer the center of my world. The real legacy I had created wasn't the house or the fortune. It was the foundation I had built. It was the people whose lives had been changed because I chose to fight. And in that moment, I understood something profound. The sweetest revenge was not in watching Sophia and Ian face the consequences of their actions. It was in knowing that I had reclaimed not just my legacy, but my life. From my experience, I've learned that no matter how many times life pushes us down, we always have the power to rise again. For years, I let the manipulation and deceit of my own family define my worth, but I found the strength to reclaim it, not through anger, but through self-respect and action. If you're facing challenges, whether it's betrayal, loss, or simply feeling unheard, remember this: your voice matters. You are not defined by the mistakes of others or by the situations that have tried to break you. Stand up for what's yours. Find the courage to confront those who undermine you, and most importantly, don't let fear silence your truth. If I had let the years of manipulation continue, I would have lost everything. But once I found my voice, everything changed. Take it from me, your legacy. Your story is still being written. To anyone who has ever felt invisible, overlooked, or taken advantage of, you have the power to change the narrative. You don't need to wait for others to validate your worth. You already have it. Share your story. Speak up and don't let anyone tell you that your dreams or your rights don't matter. Your fight is worth it, and I promise you there is light on the other side. Thank you for reading, for being part of this journey with me. Your support means more than words can express. And if you're going through something similar or just need someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out. Share your thoughts, ask questions, or just let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear your story too. Together we can break the silence and rebuild what's been broken.